no found rows too true when you don't need pagination. Another trick he outlines here is turning off caching, which seems counterintuitive. Caching makes things faster because the next time around you don't need to do a lookup. But caching has some overhead. It has to store that cached information somewhere, and it has to look it up later. If you don't need that, if this is something you're going to do as a one-off, or it's something that's going to change every single time you don't want it to be cached, you can turn caching off. And that's with these other less documented features. One called update post cache to false, and the other one is update post term cache to false, whether it caches information about the post or the post term. All the different pros and cons about that are described in this article. So another little trick to keep in your toolkit. And so WP Query Monitor, as you run these things, you can actually see the differences. And he talks about the differences here, where when he turns them off and on, he shows what the differences are. So for example, from 0.0107 seconds to 0.0006 seconds. You know, fast to super fast, but again, a lot of users hitting you, these things start to add up. They start to matter. And before you start adding a bunch of resources, you know, again, we're assuming that you have good infrastructure, good server, good hosting provider, you're using a CDN, you're loading your scripts asynchronously, you're using a caching plugin. These are the things that you can control in your own code, though. The next thing he describes in this article related to WP Query are which fields you want to get back. By default, WP Query and WP User Query both will return you objects, either a WP Post object or a WP User object, or more likely an array of those objects. There's a lot of data that's going in there. Not only do you have all those different post fields, but you have all the meta information as well, preloaded. Every post, all the post meta are pulled in. If you don't need that information, that's a whole extra call you just pulled in for nothing. Not to mention the actual network throughput of it's getting from the database to you. So the WP Query and the WP User Query both let you specify a return. And you can say, hey, I just want to get these specific fields. I just want a list of IDs. So it's something you should do. One thing to keep in mind in doing that, though, is you will bypass filters that could run on those data fields. So for example, when I talk about encrypt WP later on, we will encrypt and decrypt sensitive user information, such as first name, last name, automatically for you. We do that using filters that get run on the user object when you fetch a specific key. So for example, if you have a WP user object and you say user arrow first name, we are able to hook into that and say decrypt that for you. If you did a direct call in here and just said get me back just the first name field, that would bypass that. And you never know what other plugins bypass that either. So just something to keep in mind of a trade-off of not going through the object system. You know, benefits and trade-offs. So that's all that's covered in that article. Worth a gander. How do I go back to full screen? Yep.
So this is only stuff you could do for your own code, right? You couldn't use these tricks to optimize.
You can, because of hooks. Yeah, so you know this hook that he actually talks about here, where'd it go? The pre-get post hook and the pre-get user or something of that sort, both of those get run at the top of WP Query and the top of WP User Query before it does anything else. And you can then inspect, you have full access to the WP Query class object. So you can see who called it, what's it actually looking up. You can inspect all the different fields and change any of them. And so you can see, okay, this plugin is doing this thing and is doing it badly. Let me hook into that and change it. We do that as well for encrypt WP when we need to search for metadata. So for example, when it comes to searchable encryption, if you encrypt something properly, you can't just do an exact match, because every time you encrypt it, you get a different value. So if I encrypt my name, Yaron, and I get ABC, whatever, and then I encrypt it again, I'll get DEF, whatever. So I can't search for the database to find me everything for DEF. So we have a complicated sort of hashing system, which I can go over later if we have time, but we basically have to catch that query. And we say, hey, someone is searching for all users with the name Yaron, and we have to actually change that and manipulate that and make it do our searching mechanism instead. So you can do that with these filters.
So you can essentially apply the no found rows onto someone else's query.
Yeah, you can apply it to the whole site if you want, but then you'd break pagination. So you can certainly do that. Yeah. So that comes back to the great power, great responsibility. When you install a plugin, it's all good if you're just trying to get a proof of concept running. But if you are using an enterprise-grade code, it's your responsibility as a developer to look at that plugin's code. And I don't just mean skim it. I mean go through it line by line, figure, because odds are they are making a lot of mistakes. And if this is going to be an enterprise product with a lot of users, you can fork it. I've done that before with different plugins, and I've just made my own version specifically for this client. Yes, it will break updates, but if it already satisfies all the features they need, it's not the end of the world. Of course, the best way would be to contribute to that plugin, do pull requests, but it all depends on the scenario. I can't even tell you how bad most plugins are written. Next, chapter 2. Before I move on, does anyone have anything else to contribute on WP Query? Questions, other tricks of the trade they know? Okay. So caching and transients, and I'm not referring to caching plugins. So there's the WordPress object cache and the WordPress transients API, and they're very similar. I linked to both of them here. Both are meant to store the results of complex operations, such as external API calls, page fragments, anything that you don't want to do every single time. You can either stick it in the transient or you can stick it in the object cache. The main difference is that the object cache, by default, is not persistent across page loads. So the object cache, which is used by WP cache add, all these different things I have below here, cache delete, if you don't have a caching plugin installed, such as W3 Total Cache, it's just going to cache that for the life of the page, which can be useful, especially if you want to use something like a rate limiter. If some hook gets called a million times on the page, you only want to do it the first time, something on it, you can check, hey, have I done it within, have I done it more than 5 times or whatever. So there can be a use for only caching something on a given page load. If you do have a persistent caching plugin installed, such as W3 Total Cache, it will then store it in some other memcache layer. Maybe it's Redis, maybe it's APC, maybe it's memcached. Point is that will have its own lifecycle rules of when that thing expires, how long it's good for. Whereas transients, if you don't have a persistent caching plugin installed, it will stick it into the database in the options table. And that's a really important distinction, because that's a whole other database call. If you're trying to minimize database calls, you can actually shoot yourself in the foot by overusing transients on a site that doesn't use a caching plugin. So you really want to make sure you know what you're doing when you're using the Transients API. There are some great articles on this. Transient Gotchas here. There's a comment on an article by Otto where he just rips apart. Someone's talking about using transients to cache everything on Web Dev Studios, and then Otto writes his comment of, no, don't do that, and here's why, and the pros and cons. You're using, transients wrong. Article, transient cache alternatives articles. So those are all 3 are worth a read. Let me see if I can pull one up here just to give some of the things they talk about here. They talk about things that most people would think about storing in transients, such as share counts, including likes, tweets, retweets, digs, upvotes, and everything else. These numbers are usually obtained through remote HTTP requests, and while the Transients API is a really good way of caching such requests, you really don't want to be saving those numbers to a volatile storage or in your options table. With a volatile storage, he means if you're using like a memcache plugin, you may lose these share counts every once in a while, and retrieving them again may become quite expensive, and even more so if you run out of memory. Storing share counts in your options table is not going to scale. 100,000 posts, 200,000 option rows for transients, bad business. Same thing, he goes through all these different things that are, it's a good read. I think he's a little bit too much against transients because even if it's going to lose it eventually and you can fetch it after the fact, that's not necessarily the end of the world if you get a space savings. He does talk about an interesting alternative is using a metadata API as an alternative. If you know something is related to a given post, such as how many people like it, you can store that into the metadata and store it as an array where you have the expires feature and the data feature. So because the thing is, metadata is fetched automatically whenever a post is loaded anyways. It's all in one database query. So if you're getting back this record of data from the post table that includes this, you can check. You know, it's already there anyways. You have the core data that's cached, and you have when it expires. There's no extra calls, and you can control it. The downside, as he talks about, is then you have to manage that cache yourself, whereas all these other third-party tools that have their own algorithms for managing those caches. So it's worth the read. All these articles I'm linking to are worth the read. There's no one clear way for any of this stuff. What's important is to know the distinctions, know the pros and cons, and decide what's right for that call. The worst thing is to do is nothing. If you are making an HTTP API request on every single page load, you're going to get slammed. And these are things that are happening on server side as well. And they can be happening within your own plugin as well. I mean, internally, if you're doing operations, WooCommerce does caching throughout, and it has a whole cache helper with transients. And that brings me to my next topic related to transients, which, oh, geez.
Real quick on that same topic.
Sure.
Transients are not necessarily permanent, so like the name transient implies that they kind of come and leave as they please. So when you're setting it, you set a time limit, and that's the maximum amount of time that you want that to stay in the database before it's recalled. But it's not a promise that it's going to be there for that long. It might be removed immediately as soon as you put it into the database. And that can trip up a lot of people.
Very good point.
And the comment that like I made about like if you have 100,000 posts and you're storing all of that in transients, that's with the assumption that those 100,000 posts were all queried like at the same time and stored in the transients, and like all of those are there at the same time. That's like a maximum extreme. Generally, it's going to be like the top 10% of those posts that are hit that are actually in that transient table or transient section at any given time.
Also a good point.
A little bit misleading.
Yeah, I agree.
So, it's incredibly helpful, but it's definitely a place that if you misjudge it or rely on it too heavily, you can shoot yourself in the foot.
Yep, very good points. The most important thing is just educate yourself. You're not going to become an expert on transients from this overview. It's go out there, do some homework, get acquainted with it, learn how to use it, and then start using it. WooCommerce has a pretty clever grouping solution. So the WP options cache or object cache has a concept of groups. So when you add something to a cache, you can put it into groups, which lets you clear the cache in sections. So for example, if you're caching all information about a specific booking, you can clear out all your booking things in one go when that booking checks out or something. The transient doesn't have that. The transient API doesn't have this concept of grouping. It just has data and key. So to get around that, there's been this Invalidation Schemes article that this guy came up with, which is a pretty clever workaround. He describes it here. I recommend you read this. I've talked about this at a couple of other presentations I've given before, where he essentially comes up with a hash prefix to invalidate the cache as a whole group. It's a long article, and he goes all through these different approaches you can take and then comes up with a good solution. I'm not going to dive into this long article. I do recommend that you read it. But the conclusion is the way WooCommerce does it. So if we have, they call it get transient version, where you give it a group, you're giving refresh of whether you want to clear it or not. And so it takes that group name that you provided, appends it with the word transient version, sees if there's a transient set for that version. So you're basically getting a version of that group. So say the group name is just bookings. So you're getting bookings transient version. So it sees, is there a transient for the version of that group? If nothing comes back, it will delete version transients for that. I'll show what's going on there. And then it will set the transient for the name and for the value to expire at a given time. So delete version transient, so if we look at that, it deletes from the options where option name, like, or by option ID. And it has a whole schedule. This might not be the same thing I'm thinking of. Let me look at. Because I know one article pointed out that if you are doing this, what they're doing here, delete from the options table or looking by transient name, it's very unreliable because a lot of times it won't be stored in that database. Oh, but they do have this if not using external object cache. That's a good function to know. I didn't know about this function. WP underscore using external object cache. So if you want to check to see if you're using an internal versus object, whether it's being stored in the database or not, you can do that. That's really neat. But I'm looking for where they talk about using this in MD5 hash. These are all just clearing it. I'm not sure where it is, but I've talked about it in the past, so I don't need to go into too detail here. But this article, if it's something that you need, something that you think you'll benefit from, clearing out a group of transients all at once when something changes for a whole group. So if you're storing all these individual aspects of a specific thing in the transient cache, and you need to clear out all those ones just along, this article is a great read for invalidation schemes, as well as these other articles. Before I move on to chapter 3, any other comments, criticisms, contributions to the concept of caching, please?
Yeah, so the get transient function, if you are using the external object cache, it will reference the cache, then bypass all the database related stuff. So that's just something to be aware of also.
Yeah, and you should be. So, considering that this presentation is on for managing your own code, writing something that will scale, not necessarily giving third-party plugins, which is something good too, but if you're building a site for client or for your own project, you should be using a caching plugin. So you should be using object caching, so this shouldn't be in the database. But again, you should always code defensively. You never know what will change.
Just in general, people on the internet are asking when people in the audience say something, do you just kind of reiterate it? Oh,
wow, people are actually watching.
Yeah.
Hi, Internet. I always just assume that these caches go to Neverland. Okay, the comment that was just made was to keep in mind that with the Transient API, it very often doesn't go into the options table. If you're using in options a caching plugin, such as W3 Total Cache, etc., it will bypass the options table entirely.
Is it Kevin Hoffman? Is he like, because he's the only one watching.
I can't see, I can only see the messages.
The question was, is it Kevin Hoffman? And all right, chapter 3, moving on to custom post types versus custom tables. This is a very short slide. Always use custom post types, whenever possible, at least. Never say never, never say always, but custom post types, you get the benefit of everything WordPress is built around custom post types. So you get your optimization, you get your caching, you get your sanitation, you get your SQL preparation to prevent injection attacks. You get the regular enhancements that the WordPress core community adds to the meta query system, the taxonomy searching system. Taxonomy system is great for adding meta groupings, and you can use custom fields that are all loaded at the same time. So you should really, really ask yourself a question if you are creating a custom table. Unless you're doing something like analytics, where you're really just writing a lot of data all at once and that you need to do joins and grouping on, you should really just throw it in a custom post type. the preloading of user meta, for example, or just meta in general, as I mentioned before, whenever you pull in an object from the database, it will pull in all the meta information for you, and it will cache all that within the object cache as well. So you don't get that benefits with custom tables. It's also database agnostic. You don't have to worry about whether you're hitting PostgreSQL, MySQL, whatever. That's all abstracted away from you. If it doesn't fit in a post type for whatever reason, you can try repeating meta fields. It's actually surprisingly little known about that, how all meta fields can be repeating. So if you have a WordPress post type called car, and you want to add multiple colors, so the car is available in multiple colors, you can add that, and that's where you have the whole setting single to true or single to false. So you can, if you have a lot of just sort of one-off data and you don't want to create a whole new post for every line of that data, you can kind of group it into posts and do those repeating factors in the meta table instead, or the options table. As a last resort, you can serialize it, store it in the options table. The downsides to serialization, those you can't search over it, but the benefits is you pull it in all at once. One row of data contains a bunch of data that you can then use, which is great for options, for example. If you must use custom tables, be careful. Sanitize your inputs, the ones that come in using sanitized text fields and the other sanitized things. Prepare from SQL attacks using WPDB prepare. I can't tell you how many client projects I've come on where they had someone who was half decent at PHP but didn't know diddly about WordPress, and they're just running things that people are posting directly against the database. It's madness. So don't be like that guy. Sanitize, inject, prevent. Also, add your own caching. If you're not going to benefit from WordPress's internal caching system, look into how they do it and copy them. It's actually pretty clever, especially when it comes to user meta. Chapter 4, profiling. Before I do that, question?
Yeah, I got a question on the CPTs versus custom tables. Say you were going to build kind of like a client management, like a CRM.
Sure.
CRM. So how would you handle the different types of data that you would have there, right? Because you'd have clients, you would have orders, you would have contact information, that sort of thing.
Sure. Users, clients are users. All their user information are user meta. Everything about them can be user meta. Orders, another post type called order, can be linked to the user that created it. All the information about that order. I mean, just look at how WooCommerce does it, or look at any of the other WordPress CRMs that have been built out there and how they do it. I mean, really, the only times I've seen custom tables where it makes sense are for just writing a lot of data, like logging. If you're keeping a log of all these different operations, or analytics, which is just a form of logging, then it makes sense. But for the most part, if you get clever, you can get it into those tables. I mean, the downside is you have these massive tables, but there are ways to get MySQL to optimize around that. But that falls into the infrastructure category. Okay. Yes.
One thing to tie into that, I've built several CRMs using WordPress, and a feature that's pretty underutilized and rarely known is that you can actually use taxonomies with user objects. So you can create taxonomies to group your users and then query based on that. Okay. And then that becomes much easier to kind of separate those out. Yeah. And then those same taxonomies can also apply to custom post types or pages or whatever. So if you have a sales funnel that you need to channel things through, you can have a custom post type for the company or the client. Yeah, and then you can kind of taxonomize those together, along with, like, if you pair that with the custom meta tables, then there's really not a need to dig too much into like building your own tables, because you can piggyback off a lot of that relational database structure that WordPress already utilizes.
Very good point. And tied to that concept of what he was just saying with taxonomies, I mean, taxonomies are very overlooked alternatives to Meta because it's a taxonomy. You get a grouping out of the box. You get some of the WordPress page templating out of the box for it. But now with the last whatever a year or so, when they released Taxonomy Meta, you can now add meta information about your taxonomies, and you can query for taxonomies based on meta, and then query for posts based on those taxonomies. It's really powerful. It's good stuff. Any other comments on custom tables versus custom post types, or thoughts of when a custom table would be the better fit? Okie doke. Moving on. Chapter 4, profiling. Just a quick question. How many people here have ever profiled a WordPress or PHP app before? No one. That is very surprising. Okay, cool. So what profiling is it will profile your app. It will track a set of page cycles, and it will build really complicated mappings of what's calling what and how long those are taking and where errors are happening and how many times certain things get called. A very aggregate, heavy hammer version of that is the P3 Profiler plugin. That will just go through a bunch of pages and tell you how long each plugin is contributing to the page load. Super useful. You would be shocked at how some very popular plugins such as Paid Membership Pro, oh my gosh, that plugin has issues. It adds so much to page cycles. I mean, some old versions such as the WordPress admin menu editor, something that you would just think, it's just adding menus, it's moving things around for a while, and they've fixed most of this. It would add significant load. And like I said earlier, a lot of these plugins load, you don't notice when it's just you hitting it. But when you have millions of people using it, they really add up. So from a high-level aggregate to identify at least which plugin is causing the issue, P3 Profiler. That won't tell you how to fix it, though, and it won't tell you which part of the plugin is doing the issue. For that, you need more of these granular ones. So Xdebug has a profiler built into it that integrates with PHP Storm and other IDEs. It's really complicated, though. It's complicated to set up. It uses a lot of resources. It's pretty intensive, and it's even more complicated to digest that information. Just going, a lot of these dumps, I mean, they're tracking every little thing, so they're collecting a lot of data. So these profile dumps can be massive files that can take a while just to open up in a visualizer. These days, it's been really a big push towards cloud providers, such as New Relic, or what I like is Blackfire, which is specifically for PHP. Blackfire has a free version. It's pretty easy to set up. If you basically install a PHP library, it lets it intercept things. You activate it with a Chrome or browser extension, and it basically intercepts your page as it's loading. And it will give you a really nice graphical representation of what's going on in your code. And it will let you dive in with fancy charts, and it handles all that data. They store it on their side. It's cloud. So that's when I've really only used it when I've been running into an issue, when I'm finding a site is slow for me. But if you're building something that you intend to have millions of people use, you should just do it before you even go live. Just see where the concentrations are. You'll see functions that are being called over and over and over again and that don't need to be. Maybe you can add a rate limiter in there to prevent it. You'll see database queries that take a significant longer than other database queries. They're outliers. They don't take long individually, maybe a fraction of a second, but all the other ones are, factor 10 smaller. That's worth looking into. What is that database query doing? If you're not a MySQL expert or a SQL expert and you don't really know how to optimize database queries, hire one just for that task if necessary. It's a great thing to learn how to optimize these sort of queries. Odds are it's not coming from WordPress. Maybe it's coming from a custom. At least it'll point you in the right direction. Point is, be a stickler. Take care of the pennies and the dollars. Take care of themselves, or whatever, however that goes. Crack the whip on yourself when it comes to finding the bottlenecks. Yes?
Got something to add about P3 Profiler. So I've used that in the past, but they haven't maintained the plugin in a while, and I think it's not compatible with PHP 7. Like it breaks. Like it'll destroy not kill your site, but it basically, if you run it, it'll blow your site up. But yeah, so if you're still on like 5.6, you're fine. but I think on 7 it's a little bit.
And you should be on 7. So
But you
forget
should be
about
on
that
7.
plugin. It's not worth it.
It's
Although
not worth it.
you can switch back to 5.6 to run the test and then
There
switch
you
back
go.
up again. This isn't something that's supposed to be running regularly. It's just running during development as you're identifying those bad plugins. And
I think they may update it. I mean, like it's owned by GoDaddy, I think, runs that plugin. Yeah. So I don't know. But anyway, just wanted to make sure people know that.
Sure, no, good point. I did not know that. Actually, come to think of it, last time I tried using it didn't work, and I didn't have time to figure out why. That was PHP 7, so good to know. But yeah, Blackfire.io, I was surprised at how well it worked, and really intuitive interface. I recommend giving it a shot. Last chapter is plugin architecture. I don't have many notes on this either, but this is less about the actual performance in terms of page load and more about scaling in terms of a code base. If you're not gonna be the only person working on this project. Other developers are gonna come into it if it's gonna be big. They need to be able to figure out what your code did, what it's doing. It needs to be clean, it needs to be architected well. You don't want to have just one giant file with 1 million hooks and actions in there, and no classes and spaghetti code. You don't want to have 1 million different classes that aren't named well. It can be a nightmare, and it eventually can add to performance if it's a big enough base and if everything is loaded all at once rather than being selectively loaded, or if you're not using single instances of managers, for example, of services, either through a singleton or better yet through dependency injection. What I mean by that, if you have a service class or a manager class that just does a few things and has a state to it, so you don't want it to be static, but you don't need a separate one every single time you use it. Maybe you have a class that's really good at handling AJAX connections or whatever like that. You'd either want to create a singleton for it so that whenever you fetch that class, it's using the same instance, but there are a lot of downsides to singletons. So better yet, use a dependency injection manager, such as Dice, and configure it to be a single instance. What that does is basically, and if you don't want to get into dependency injection, scares you whatever reason, you can just make your own container class that has all your different services and managers in there, and you can sort of fetch them as needed. But I really recommend dependency injection. I've talked about it at a number of these different presentations. It has been a game changer for me in my PHP code. I've used it. I always use it in JavaScript or Angular because Angular is built on dependency injection. I've used it in C# land, but adding it to the PHP world it's just so much easier to manage a large code base. You don't have to worry about where those services are coming from. They're just injected as they're needed, and it lets you swap them out. So if you want to do unit testing, which you should, you can send in mocks for those sort of things and just test the one thing you're testing. Always use classes. Everything should be a class. Everything. You really want to minimize as much of these pure functions as possible. You see it all the time. There'll be global functions that will fetch classes and do things on them. If you can get around that using a manager with dependency injection, it's just better. So what I mean by that is instead of calling a global function that will fetch an instance of a class and a singleton of a class and then call a function on that class or get something from the session, expose that through some sort of factory pattern or some for dependency injector rather than just using global function. Global functions are a mess.
Do you have an example of that?
Sure.
A good example of like a really well-architected class?
Yeah, so let me show you the bad example first, because WooCommerce uses them all over the place. So, come on. Yeah, if we do like user functions, WC user functions. These are all global functions here. Disable admin bar, create new user, WC. They prefix it with WC to somewhat namespace it. This is probably too small for you guys. it's still just procedural code. It's not object-oriented in any way. So if we look at some of my code, which is beautiful.
So just so I'm clear, because I'm a little fuzzy on this, the class is everything inside the function, and then
there's no class in this at all. These are all just global functions. This is a global function called WC create new user. But if I try to expose or find one that just exposes a class, that's a little harder to find, but they are there. Okay, so for this one, WC paying customer, this WC get order returns a class. It returns a, okay, here's an even better one. WC get order itself is a global function. And it returns WC, which is a singleton pattern of the WooCommerce container. And then it calls its order factory, which is a class on the WC container that is in charge of creating or fetching orders. And then that order factory contains something get order for the order. This is the way to do it. You should just be calling that. Rather than saying WC get order, your code should be doing a version of this. Now, the problem with doing it this way, though, is it's a singleton pattern. So if we go into WC and see what it does, it calls WooCommerce :instance, which is the singleton pattern. For those who aren't familiar with the singleton pattern, you have it's a way of ensuring that you only have one instance of a class. So here we have self instance. So right here there's a static variable on this WooCommerce class called instance that's set to null, meaning it hasn't been created yet. And then in the instance method, which is also static, means it can be called from anywhere, it sees if that instance has been created. So if it's null, it creates it, it calls its constructor, and then either way it returns it. So whenever you call instance, you can be sure you're only getting that single instance that's been created. If it hasn't been created, it's created. If it's already been created, you get that. It's a very common pattern, and it's overused a lot because it's easy. One of the issues with it is, for one thing, it doesn't give you the control of saying maybe you want another instance. Maybe you don't want that original instance. Two, it's domain-specific knowledge that's within the class. The person who's using it has to know, oh, I don't call the constructor, I call instance. There are ways to hide the constructor, but still, like someone has to know that. Usually when they want to create your class, they should just create your class. If you have a special way of creating your class, you should supply a factory. And they do. For orders, for example, they have an order factory. So if we look at order factory here, which is a cool pattern, it's this class called order factory, and it has these functions for getting orders, and it extracts that away. So you don't have to say new order and set it up in a certain way. The order factory will deliver that to you. But then it's a looping chicken and egg instance, because how do you get that factory? How do you get the single instance of that factory? So factories can either be static as well. So it's another way you can get around singletons is using static methods, because then you don't have to create an instance of your factory. You just call the factory, and then it will do its business, what's called stateless. So you'd have the factory : get order or whatever. Dependency injection gets around all of this, because you don't have to build your functions in any special way. You can just build them just to do their one thing normally, and the dependency injector, the manager around that, will handle those instantiations for you. So if we look at, for example, my manager, so I have a booking manager. This is essentially a service that handles bookings in a special way. It has methods such as get booking, methods such as get bookings using a booking an array, and so I'm using inheritance. I'm sitting on top of WooCommerce bookings plugin, which has this a WC booking class, and I extend the WC booking class with all the information that are specific to this project. So when I want to fetch a booking, I want them to go through my booking manager instead. So I'll do right here, this is a factory essentially. My booking manager will fetch a booking using data, and then instantialize it correctly and return it. So when someone needs this factory, this manager, they don't say, Haifu Booking Manager get instance. They don't say new Haifu Booking Manager. All they have to do is put it in their constructor. And the dependency injector will take care of the rest. So let me just say find usages, and I'll find one of these cases. No, it's still indexing for some reason. See, it's under type hinting is what it calls. So here is a linked booking class. This is something that is in charge of linking bookings together. And in my constructor, I say this class takes as an argument to set it up a Haifu Booking Manager. I'm using PHP type hinting in the name. So the dependency injector, when it gets to when someone else asks for this class, wherever it may be, probably in another constructor, it will look and say, hey, this guy needs a booking manager to do his job. I'm going to go create one if it doesn't already exist. So I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about where this comes from. I don't have to worry about setting it up. If it needs something else to do its job, and it does, in its constructor you can see it requires a customer manager to do its job, and the customer manager doesn't need anything to do its job. A very simple class. It just has is customer. But if that needed something else, it'll handle circular dependency. It'll just take care of that all for you. So you get around all these issues. You don't have to create factories. You don't have to create singletons. You don't have to create everything being static. Every class just does its job, and the instantiation is handled by the dependency injector. It's called DICE is the one I use. It's great. It's super lightweight. And so then when new people come onto this project, it's after the initial ramp up period. It's easy for them to add to it. As soon as they wrap their mind around it, they don't have to go through all my code and be like, where is this? How do I create that? How do I instantiate that? So some people call them managers, some people call them services, just these classes that do a job. Single responsibility principle, make sure that every class does one thing and one thing only. If you have one class that has two methods in it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's easy to read, it's easy to understand. Name your classes well and that people can find them. Read everything on Carl Alexander. He writes about object-oriented design all the time, specifically for WordPress and PHP. It's great writing. It's really good. You can learn a lot from it. Dependency injection, just talked at length about that. Comment everything. As we all know, good comments are important. PHP doc block everything. That's, if you saw in the code, I use that all over the place, such as here. Determine if user is customer, and it takes the parameters. It tells it it's an int or a null, the user ID, and it specifies what it is. It specifies a return. If you're using an IDE, that will give someone hinting as they're calling your function. They will be able to see what it does. They don't have to dive into your code and see, wait, what does this do? How do I call this? What parameters do I need to have? It'll tell them everything they need. It will give it autocomplete. WordPress loves passing around arrays as arguments. It's bad. It's easy, but it's bad because someone has to know what your array does. They're going to have to read the documentation to know what to specify. If you don't want to have a million different arguments being passed to that function, maybe have some overloads. You can have multiple. I guess you can't do overloads in PHP. Take an object, a parameter object instead. Make a new class that has all those different parameters as it takes, and you can set your defaults in there. So if someone's calling a get bookings thing rather than calling an array of all the things, they specify a class of all those things. These are all just best practices for coding in general. It's not going to have a major impact on performance, though it might. But if you're building something that scales, if you want your code to scale, if you want a team to be able to take over, it's something to keep in mind. Any other arguments, thoughts, feedback on plugin architecture? In that case, I'm done. Thank you. Any other thoughts before we move on? See how we doing on time. Ooh, I talked for a while. Hope it was interesting. Who wants to come up next? We got Scott, we got Joe, and who is going to talk about Elasticsearch? Did they come? You, great. Who wants to talk first?
I'll go. Mine's quick.
Great, come on up. Do you need my computer or want to use yours?
We can skip mine too if you need to. I don't mind.
Okay, we'll do yours last if we have time.
Yeah, put it on the bottom.
Here, I was afraid I wouldn't have enough stuff to talk about. Say hi to the folks at home.
Hi, folks at home. Hey, everybody.
Hey,
How you doing tonight? What?
any poems tonight?
No poems tonight. Only humor.
Any good humor?
Yes, good humor. So this is writing code that scales, aka what not to do. In the start, at an agency through an agency. So what? What? Oh, go. Keep on. Okay, just stay. Yeah, I'm talking to you. I thought you went like this.
Did I?
You went like that. Yeah, you confused me. Threw me off. I'm okay. I'm okay. So, at the start, it was at an agency through an agency. So that's the beginning of a bad story. With the intention of heavily modifying an existing theme. Graphic designers are sometimes too talented. Curves and oblong shapes on backgrounds, you know where I'm getting.
SVG.
Then we have multi-template, this was 3 years ago, multi-templated child themes with advanced custom fields rigmarole. Let's take a look at some code. So,
What a shame.
yeah. This is the oh, can you see that? Can you not see that? I'm plugged into the HDMI.
You're so funny, Scott.
Just try to unplug it and plug back in.
Okay.
He's doing this on purpose. This is part of it.
This is the stick.
What do you switch to?
There's my desktop. Sublime.
Sublime like DRM. So
Right?
Might be on another screen.
That's not how Windows work.
what the hell?
Isn't that weird? It's all gone.
You sure it's not a different screen?
I can try to tab through, but I'm not sure how to do that.
You move like the mouse left and right, doesn't? You unplug and replug it back in?
Yeah.
How do I turn it on and off again?
I could do that, but then we'd sit around for another. I said I'd be quick. Yeah, that's weird.
Function key plus F2.
F2. You're gonna turn my. I don't have an F2.
With this one.
Oh yeah.
Hold on function.
Hold on function. No. Here. F2. Yeah, go ahead.
Display property name?
Here's F2 up here.
Maybe it's different. F10.
Here's what I tried.
No, it's not frozen. It's still working. Oh. There you got something.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
That's not how Windows works.
That's not how Windows works. Where did it go, though?
It works a lot of ways, bro. Have 2 monitors at home or something.
Yeah, I just have no monitors at home, just this monitor. And then it's back. So I've got to pull it over here. Anyway, the point of the story was, look at all this. Look at all this, the field and advanced custom fields, and just going on for days.
The point is that you use a white background.
Oh, I can change it in the preferences if you want me to. I changed it for this presentation, but yeah, just for you guys. Anyway, let's see if I can get PowerPoint to come back. Hey, so we saw that one already. Then the accessibility at the last minute. Even though this was a site for kids being included in classrooms. And then all the layouts and the templates you already saw. So small shared servers we talked about already that we don't want to talk about those, so I'll skip over that. But it immediately brought down the site when I was giving the client a tutorial. And they upgraded the services, did fix the issues, but yet what to do differently. So what to do differently, break up all the parts. As you saw from my code, it was a child theme with multiple templates, and there was no need to have it that many templates. Just but break it into littler parts, and so the server will run faster. Do not challenge yourself to make every little bit customizable. That was my challenge. Was basically I challenged myself to use advanced custom fields to its full potential to see what it could actually do, and it turned into a disaster for me. Accessibility from day one is really important, and custom builds for custom designs, I think, for sure. Don't take an existing theme and try to bend it to your will to make it to what you want it to do. Anyway, after much rigmarole, that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Your next presentation will be how to give a presentation, what not to do.
Do you need my help? Oh.
We had a request for more haikus on your next presentation.
Okay. Will do.
For those of you who don't know, his last presentation had some haikus. Somebody on the web.
You can actually do a golden earring cover song like that. They call robot. They got a thing, and it's called robot.
Don't be too nervous. There's only 3 people watching right now. But they're very active.
Nice.
They're very engaging.
No, you,
Camera on 3 different screens.
yeah, well, I just coughed in their face. So, so my talk is on Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is it's an Apache Lucene thing. It's written in Java, and I believe it's Lucene that does all the magic super fast stuff. So this is a website that will give you literally how to walk through the installation process. I'm not going to do a talk on the installation process. You can Google that. Unfortunately, so Elasticsearch is not a WordPress product. It's its own thing. So, but there's a great plugin called ElasticPress, which works beautifully with it. And Elasticsearch with WordPress will make your database insane. It's a game changer. So I'm going to jump over to my low-text slides. If I can.
We have till 8:30, so don't feel you have to rush.
All right. How many tabs do I have open? Where did my presentation go? It's really scary. I don't know where it went. Yeah. Like when I opened up this new window, it like moved everything. So. Oh, there we go. No, that's me. Did I minimize it? Oh, there it is. Sorry. All right. So yeah, my presentation's in Sublime.
This is meta. You're like scaling it.
Thank you. I like that. All right, so so the last talk, and specifically Yaron's talk, was how to write code that scales, which is technically the theme of tonight's talk. But I guess I am going to talk a little bit about architecture. So what are we talking about? We want millions of users to be able to visit our site concurrently without the server crashing and costing us a fortune. And I think that second part is probably the most important part, because you can buy a heavy server that'll handle, you know, whatever you need, and you're paying for that 24 hours a day, every month. You don't usually need that all the time. Usually you have heavy traffic periods and whatever. There's a lot of things that you could do code-wise. There's a lot of things. But typically the answer is load balancing. So when you're talking about architecturing like your hardware, you would separate your computing processes, programming logic, your database, your mail server, your media assets, etc. So like, you know, it's really common nowadays that you don't have your mail server living on your web server. So if your web server goes down, your mail still works. So programming logic, that's pretty much what Yaron covered. For WordPress, typically you use a CDN for media. We use a dedicated email service, cache the backend. For database, you use an external commenting system. That's probably like the #1 thing. Like WordPress gets a big complaint about the commenting table gets gigantic and slows down. So the shotgun result is use an external commenting system like Discuss or Facebook. And that's just so your database doesn't have to work as hard. So a WordPress database is a relational database. I'll read this. WordPress is kind of sometimes criticized for its database structure, which I don't think is entirely fair. It's a pretty good relational database, and it works in a lot of great ways. But all the post types share one table, which can get really long. And what I just said about the comments is specifically like the most obvious one, is that you'll have a comments table that has 100,000 lines in it. And if you need to search that table, that can be kind of slow. Typically. So none of us go around selling ourselves as relational database specialists, so who cares? this is where I think, in my opinion, Elasticsearch is like I said, kind of a game changer. What is Elasticsearch? Since we're in a library, I chose a library kind of analogy. Tried to think of a non-techie way of explaining it. And I think Elasticsearch is the card catalog expert librarian in the library who's going to find what you're looking for fast. So do we remember what a card catalog is? It's like an index that you literally go through, and it's simple. It's incredibly, the concept is very, very simple, is that, you know, you A through D or whatever, and then you have like a little code message that leads you to somewhere in this building where you can find what you need to find, versus walking through the library or, you know, wandering around aimlessly. That would be my example. So, like I said, it's Elasticsearch is a Java. It's actually a Java product. So it's written in Java, so you will have to install that. And it's on Apache Lucene. So it's really good at full text search. Full text search is its own topic. It's awesome. What is Apache Lucene? It's an Apache product. To be honest, I don't really know. But yeah, so it's really good at full text search. It's a document store similar to NoSQL database. It's accessible via RESTful API. So one of my favorite parts about it is that once it's set up, you literally access it just like you would any other API. And since it's set up as its own thing, it's available for load balancing also. So if you did have this, you know, this Elasticsearch server that just is entirely handling the communication between your database, and you have this, and for some reason that gets out of whack, you can you know, cluster that, and it would work really well. Okay, so it's I say Elasticsearch is a full text search NoSQL-like database on steroids. NoSQL database typically are known to not have a schema. In Elasticsearch, there is a schema, and there's different types of ways of referencing that doc type. So then below I wrote it. So this is kind of how, this is like a basic kind of a fake way of how to think about what the Elasticsearch, how it is looking at your words, is it breaks up the whole search term into individual words, and it indexes them. So the library example is, so index, so Elasticsearch would be an indexed keyword, and it literally will go through your entire database and figure out every single instance of where that exists, and then reverse index will you know, find it. That's the card catalog analogy. I don't know. I hope that makes sense. So traditionally, relational database takes search term like clumps. This is a low-tech explanation. And looks for them against a column in the database. So you have your like statements. Like in WordPress, typically when you do a search, that actual SQL statement will say, you know, look in the post title and the post content for a clause that looks like this. So if you have a phrase, it's going to look literally for that. Or it might break it up into contains those chunks too. But so as the table grows and the search facets become more complicated, and by facets I mean clauses, like any sort of additional complications that you want to add to it, like join statements in a relational database, those searches are going to become slower. So Elasticsearch creates that inverted index I mentioned of strings and applies weights based on index, analyzers, and frequency so that it's very easy to search relevant results. So it applies these weights to your to all of the data that it's indexing. So like if you have a word like Elasticsearch that exists many, many times, that word itself will be weighted a little bit higher than maybe a different word. And this is assuming you're doing a search for based on words. But so Elasticsearch can parse an insane amount of data within milliseconds. Can query, it's queryable via REST API and available for, I already said that. So like if you have a typical server, yeah. So like just like you have a regular server that does all your WordPress, you have your PHP code that's there. Well, if you have many people hitting it, like you might see, maybe you split that so that people are actually hitting 4 different servers. You could do the same thing with this Elasticsearch. The Elasticsearch doesn't even need to live on the same server. It could be on its own server.
Oh, so you can have 4 Elasticsearch.
Yeah,
Got it.
you can split it that way if you wanted to. So, so an example of an analyzer, this is like really kind of a deep dive into what Elasticsearch is actually doing. After this, I'll back up and kind of show you an actual practical example, I think. And how to implement this into a WordPress site, because I've kind of glossed over that so far. So examples of analyzers are whitespace, standard, simple, stop, and snowball. So each of these will apply their own kind of weights to the thing that you're searching, and based on those. So like each of them would have different like specialties, like addresses or something like that. And you can curl against this directly. You can analyze and get the results back. I can show you what that looks like. So this right here is a live example of me querying a WordPress site. So what I get back in the Elasticsearch token, so what I queried was Elasticsearch's full text search NoSQL-like database on steroids. And you can see what I get back. It tells you the position, the offsets, additional information, and so this is how it kind of makes sense of what you've asked, queried. And that's just an example of what the analyzer looks like. But I guess that's the end of my presentation document. But here's another additional, since we're in a library, a group of terms that are useful. So I'll give you the example of, actually I'll show you. So Elasticsearch, you would install this on your own. And when you're done, you have an IP address that you're going to query against via the RESTful API. So there's a service called ElasticPress. Oh, nope, didn't spell it right. ElasticPress is a tenant product, and not to plug another company, but ElasticPress is basically a plugin that you can install on your theme. You point it at that IP address, and it will automatically go through your site and basically get in front of your typical WP queries. And so now your WP queries will straight up go through ElasticPress, and they'll because they're indexed, be super, super fast. ElasticPress does require a bit of memory. I believe like the minimum requirement's like 1 gigabyte. So so you do have that to be thoughtful of. And then the other thing, ElasticPress does offer their own like hosted thing. So if you don't want to do the command line install of Java and go through the whole configuration, you could pay them to do it. But you know, we're programmers. We like to do this stuff.
So I got a question real quick. So the Elasticsearch is an open source thing that you're putting on a server?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, ElasticPress is open source. Yeah, it's an Apache product.
So Elasticsearch is,
Sorry, Elasticsearch is an Apache product.
but Elasticpress is just a
Plugin.
and that hosting pricing, are those offered by Elasticpress or are they offered by Elasticsearch?
Yeah, sorry if that didn't make sense. So TenUp sells it as a product, but their plugin is completely free, and you don't have to go through their.
But are there a million other like Elasticsearch hosting companies that you could use instead?
Good question. I don't know if there's a million out there. There might be.
The answer is yes. So in theory, if you went to a different host and you used the Elasticpress,
Yeah.
they would communicate with each other?
Perfectly. Yeah, because ElasticPress, the plugin, is simply communicating through the RESTful API, just like you would if you were communicating with it directly yourself.
So is it the Elastic search, then that open source software, is that similar to like how Algolia works or something like that? And then,
Not familiar with that one.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Essentially, they just index your site and do all the search queries off like through their API.
Okay. It sounds about right. Elasticsearch is widely used, so it wouldn't surprise me.
I think Algolia is though more for indexing like post content. So if you run a blog and you want to run a search, I thought this gets in front of the WP query. Like, does that actually speed up the site at all to help you when you write?
it will speed up the queries, the resulting queries.
Yeah, like I thought it was like a layer.
Yeah. So like for example here, this is the actual plugin, and you can actually write WP query statements using their additional stuff. So they've extended it, and it's pretty neat because like for example, if you're running like a complicated network, like say you have like 10 different blogs on the same network, and you want to query all of them, that's a really heavy query. In fact, if you try to look it up, you'll see 10 people saying don't do that because that's like rethink your architecture at that point. But if you're stubborn and you want to do it anyways, you know, this is a really, really fast way of doing it. So and so here's an example.
I was talking earlier how someone's modifying the WP query with a hook.
Yeah.
They're looking for that EP integrated set, and then they point it at their server instead.
Yeah.
So this is not so much for search, but also for like creating queries.
Yeah.
So like any plugin that writes with
Using WP query.
would get benefit.
They should, yeah.
I've got a multi-site network that this
Yeah.
would really work with.
Yeah, so I did want to show an example. This is the last site that I built using it. And this site, you know, they have different locations, and so a location they want to emphasize community, and so so Encinitas folks, once they become members, they want to hear about the events that are happening in Encinitas. So there is a blog for each one, but for the non-user, and actually I don't think they ever, I haven't looked at this in like several months, but that really heavy query that I told you about, we're doing it right here. This is querying the 6 different blogs that exist. And it's super, super fast. And it's all because of that, the way that it indexes that, in my opinion. So yeah. But yeah. This is, yeah. Yeah. Anyways, any questions there?
Then you just need like a VPS or something to have access to install this on, and you could just
Yeah.
basically point the plugin to the VPS
Yeah.
IP address.
Yeah, in this particular site, we're using, I believe, the cheapest DigitalOcean server. So they're paying $5 a month, and they get the benefit of it. And I bet you that the Elasticsearch uses most of the memory, but
You could always scale up.
they could always scale up. That's the other beautiful part about DigitalOcean or AWS or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. So I really recommend Elasticsearch. Like I said, it makes the database search really snappy. So
When you're creating content, you're writing that to the Elasticsearch.
when you're creating, when you hit publish, or when, yeah,
And all that's then getting indexed.
I believe so. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So I didn't show you the plugin itself in action. I don't know if I'm logged in, but I'm not going to be able to find it on the fly. But the site itself, yeah, okay, here it is. So once you get the plugin set up, you do have to like say index, and it'll run through your site, and it actually runs really fast too. But then, like you said, when you're actually publishing the content, that's when it indexes. So that might actually be a good point in the fact that does a plugin actually benefit from a query? I guess it depends on the query if it's indexed.
But we'll need to get indexed first before getting benefit. And then, have you hit any issues with the data in Elasticsearch not lining up with the data in the site? And, kind of balancing when you're indexing?
I haven't. This site hasn't been like smashed with like they don't have content authors constantly writing, so I haven't had a scaling issue, or I haven't ran into that issue myself. Might be something worth talking about afterwards. The question was, have you ever run into an issue where it's not indexed, and not synced with the site? If that is the case, then you can come back over to this place and you can resync. I think I am familiar with that now that I think of it. Like I said. All right, I think that's my talk. Thanks, guys.
Like like no, we can take a little longer than that. I miscommunicated that to you. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, can't help it. Come on. Hey, move the camera like back and forth for me, Yaron. That's what they want, man. All right. There you go. Get a shot of that. So I've like maybe like 2 months ago, this random dude who was never here before, told us about Google Cloud hosting. So it was maybe like 3 months ago. So I went and checked it out. After I talked to him, we had a drink afterwards, and I was talking to him about it. And he was so enthusiastic, you know, he won me over. So I gave it a shot. It's actually free. So if you go to cloud.google.com and you sign up, you get like a year free, $300 worth. So you get like $300. You spend it a year. That's enough for like 10 sites for a whole year, if they're small sites. So if you are like me and this is the kind of thing you do for fun, maybe go check it out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you guys through their the installer. So there's a lot of different things you can do. I'm just going to go in the launcher here. You can get like, so this is all like, these are like basically like their version of one-click installs for different CMSs up here, like Drupal and obviously WordPress. You can build, you can do operating system servers, and what are some other fun things that I saw in here? Good old, you can make a Joomla site if you have an 80s party to go to, huh? I don't know, but I'm sure you could do it if you were to go through. So it's all like plug and play, or just really easy to do. I'm going to go ahead and create another WordPress deployment here with you. So all I did is I went to the rocket icon up here somewhere, Cloud Launcher, and then click Launch on Compute Engine. This one is going to, I'm making a new site about myself pretty soon. So I'll probably use this for that. You know, choose your closest time zone. Here, West B. Here you choose your disk size, so you get a maximum, and then it charges you more after you go over that. You can choose whether you want to have solid state. I pretty much always go solid state. And somewhere around here, it says the price on it. This is going to be about like $5 a month, I'm assuming. Oh, $5.58, if you saw it real quick. Okay, so now while it's doing this, this is like the equivalent of like a Mojo install. And now what's going on is it's installing WordPress. I just want to tell you, like, I found this to be pretty fast as far as like an ISP. And the cool thing about it is, not ISP, but as a host, the cool thing about it is it's always faster like the second time. So if you were to go to use like the pingdom speed test, and you know you can choose where that's based, like geographically, you know. If you run it, say, I think one of them's in like Sweden. The first time it's like, if it's like 4 seconds, the second time it'll be like 3. And the reason is because, you know, Google. Are you guys like familiar with like Google hosting or cloud hosting? You guys heard of Google? You heard of Google? Yeah, yeah. It's like Netflix, but not for movies. But I found it to be super fast. To compare it, I did like actually a video on my YouTube channel comparing it to, I had like an identical site, and one was on GoDaddy, and one was on, are we done yet? Yeah. One was on GoDaddy and one was on something else. I think Google, obviously. It was on the Google Cloud, and it was like a double speed difference. Of course, that was like the cheap GoDaddy hosting, so then I put it against a pretty good like $25-ish a month account. I don't remember the specs, but I remember how much it cost, and it was still about 25% faster than that, and we're looking at, $5 a month. So not really, I don't see it so much as one of those solutions that you can throw like a super hyper site at, but if you want to build something real kind of quick and dirty, and you want it to be fast, it's a good solution. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Other than that, you can create your own SSL certificates if you want to. There's guides for that. Specifically, this one guy on YouTube who has a blog, but the channel is called One Page Zen. And you can do different installs. And if you look my sites up, I'm not going to go into it, but it's just kind of cool. Like you can do your own Apache. You can do like all the way. You can do Linux. You can use cPanel if you want. Yeah, you can do a cPanel install. I don't know. Maybe they probably paid for it. Yeah. So I haven't actually had the use. And this is kind of cool, by the way. Before we finish off, but right here I can just open up my command line window pretty easily. And for me, usually, this is the way if I want to like mess with the theme, I don't even really bother with FTP. I just will move the files in here. Sorry, huh? WP5, I don't know I don't even know what that means. Oh yeah. You could, I'm sure, although I haven't really ever gotten the chance to fool around with CLI yet. Anything you can do in a command line environment.
You have to do it. Yeah, it's not like a managed. I don't think it's managed. So like, is it, maybe update image or
Yeah, so what I've used it for, and honestly, it's just like a toy for me. What I've used it for is just like, I'll put the theme on, or I'll switch up the WP config so that I can put up bigger files.
Yeah.
It's by minute. Leave it to Google. So, but this particular plan for 10 gigs with a cloud service on solid state is like $550 a month. Yeah, because I like literally, like I put up a site for my friend and then I took it down and I paid for like 2 days of it. And it's like 20 cents. And it's like super fast. So I use it personally. I think the main thing I use it for is staging, really. Because I can build like a site, stage it, and then move it real quick. And if I'm on the go and I'm not wanting to, because I can set up I already set up a site, and to me that's comparable to the amount of time it takes me to do like a desktop server type deal, So anyway, any questions before we get out of here? They have some backups that are integrated in here. As far as security, I haven't really looked into it. I haven't really used this for like any really like serious e-commerce sites, but there is like one of these things has a backup on it. So deployment manager, but there's like some integrated backup options, and then you can also just back it up. Like if you want, you can create an FTP. And you can just back it up like the old school file way. And they also have an integrated one that I believe is free. So I'm more just trying to like introduce you to it. I'm not an expert if you can't tell. Yeah? Okay, yeah, so it's one of those things where you're pretty much out there on your own. So if you're the type of person who likes talking to people, I don't. I don't like support. I try to create a system where I'm not relying on support, That's kind of more my speed. and because that for me has been some of my least enjoyable experiences as a web developer, and I haven't really had any problems for what I've been using it for. But yeah, there's no support. Your best support is asking other dudes on YouTube, like.
Hey, were you on your own time?
Yeah, that's my form of support, you know. So it's not the same structure as like the standard, you know, like GoDaddy, SiteLock, or not SiteLock. I don't know, any other host. You know, it's different. It's a different way to do it. It's much more involved. Like, you have to be able to use command line to even really set up a site beyond like the most basic version. Because I can't, like right now, if I was to go into my site, I wouldn't even be able to up the file size or the memory, you know, or anything like that for my site without using the command line. So it's not like, it's, yeah. So, but for you'd have to be at least at kind of like almost developer level to even utilize it. You know what I mean? It's freaking fast. Like a 2 meg site I had loads in about 0.7 seconds. You know, and the first time it'll load in like 1 second, like how I was saying, because it loads faster on the second time. Anyway, cool guys. You want to close it out?
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for coming. Oh, we have an announcement.
Yep.
Do you want to be on camera?
I don't know if we have camera, but I'll use the mic.
Oh, sure. There we go. All right, so who's been around a while at AWP? Yeah, a couple. Yeah, here we go. So AWP used to be, well, on Facebook, we used to have the Advanced WordPress group, AWP, and it was born here in San Diego, and then it kind of turned global. So what I've done is I kind of missed those days when we had that Facebook group. So I went ahead and started a San Diego WordPress group on Facebook. So we have our own little community group instead of the global one, which is, you know, admin has to, you know, accept your posts and stuff like that. So if you're hanging out on Facebook a lot, you can go to groups/San Diego WP, or just do a search for, you know, San Diego WordPress on Facebook, and you'll find it. There's, I think, maybe 10 people on there right now. I think, yeah, you're on it, right? I think I added you. I added Michael and Joe. I don't have your Facebook. I thought I was for friends on Facebook. You blocked me. But yeah, hop on there. I'd like to see it grow and get like the San Diego community, you know, growing pretty big on the Facebook group, and then, you know, so we could see more people here. So that's it. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys for coming out. You know, every month it's a different day, so be sure to follow it on meetup.com to keep up to date. Different hosts each time. Always welcome for speakers as well. Just hit up who's ever in charge. And if you guys are down, love to go and grab a drink somewhere nearby. If not, just go home. I mean, you can. It's just not up to me.
How long was my presentation? Like 5 minutes? Or was it like 10?
3 hours?
It was kind of long, huh?
No.
I meant to make it a minute.
Been involved with it for data and custom projects. For a integrated dashboard for analytics tool. Something a lot of wireless connectivity and all the actual, so we would put together the queries. And,
I already put everything away.
and send it through to the Elasticsearch API. And yeah, super powerful. It's not pulling like table by table. It's still like its own house, right? Changing the data format. So the data still lives in WordPress, but a copy of it is just a duplicate. Same word, same post, structured this way, structured that way, structured that way. So you have to read it this way, it has it over here. That's why it's so memory.
So does it block like you fire
So
I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. So they, I mean, I don't even know. I didn't know what they were. So they've been developing elsewhere. So you definitely should. I've been using it actually. It's more like an experiment ground. I have a Drupal site I put up because I've been trying to get out of it Drupal. Yeah, for me too, like the advantage of being able to set up for 2 days, you know? So if you're just staging it and then you can send the client the link, it's an IP number, they can look at it, and if they have any feedback at that point, they just, you know, so if they're remote, they're not near you, and it's very easy, and then you can just transfer that site to whatever the domain is, you know? Or you can keep it hosted there, or you can transfer it. Use like a Another question, you are using it? Not like a famous one. I mean, I do it, honestly, for me it's just like, there's like stuff I want to talk about that's related to development and marketing and stuff, and
I have some experience on that. If you want to the streaming application you use
so yeah, today I use something called OBS. Yeah, which is actually like
I used 1 month ago ManyChat. It is a training feature, so it's not flexible.
Okay.
If you can put you can put titles, you can put all function effects.
The main reason I use this one, yeah, break down that tripod and put that camera.
Is it safe to unplug?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're kind of offloading a bit of power.
Yeah. So there's the power of just like getting that super advanced search, but then there's the power you get by just offloading to like you were saying. How does this cable come?
Just pull it up.
This what?
The old school way. You pull it. Just pull it.
This one, I'll show.
Oh, this one doesn't come out.
Oh yeah. What is it?
It's a battery. So you can have like a stationary battery.
Where does it go?
It's a battery.
It's just battery.
Oh. Hold on, this tab is now. It's a slit in the little hole covering the whole.
What did you do?
It didn't. No. Pop it anyway. Cool. I can do it if you need it.
My computer can't handle 2 cameras, bro.
Stationary
Not
battery.
this
I still
one.
don't understand.
I have like a workstation at my office, but this thing is just like for.
I think if you zoom out enough where you see the speaker and the,
Yeah, it's fine.
that's fine. Or just zoom in on the.
So you mean like
If you want to try the ManyChat, you can use the streaming.
Do you use Twitter or anything like that? So I can just ask you.
Not,
Do you have a card?
not Twitter, but I can do my.
Did you output from
Yeah,
the
he
laptop?
said you can do an HDMI in,
Yeah, because then you could just
but that's to
whatever
get.
he's got going on the
HDMI into
screen,
what
you
though?
just-
Yeah, like exactly. So you'd have to have like an HDMI into like some kind of USB adapter.
If
That
you,
would be slow on frames anyway.
If you use mobile streaming stuff, you don't need those improvements, gadgets.
Yeah, in the past, what I've used that's worked well is YouTube Live, you know, over Hangouts. So I'll do, you know, I'll have, it's like a Hangouts conversation that's being broadcasted, and so anyone who's involved in the conversation, their screen streams, and then the master controller can say camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, and so the only catch is that you have to set up those cameras ahead of time. You can't, once you're starting living, you can't add more cameras.
Yeah,
so,
and if,
The ManyChat, those are features.
What's that?
The ManyChat.
Oh, yeah.
applications,
Dude, I
those
can't
are
put
features.
this
You
back
can
in.
use mobile.
Sorry, I'll do it. It wasn't like attached to anything, it just sort of plugged in there.
Can I try? I'm good at those stuff.
Sure.
I understood already.
I'm a pro stream tech. That's my job now.
Need like something small to squeeze it in. Like
It's hard to do this kind of thing like
Yeah.
mobile.
It's nice to put with the little
Like a
small
tool or
stuff.
something.
Like
Yeah.
a tube
Otherwise,
stick
we
or a
can.
poker. Some sort of poker. Maybe try this guy. Try to end that.
Or like a paper clip would probably work.
Yeah.
Paper clips much
have
more
one.
easy.
We try that.
We can smash the plastic and it can be.
It's not the end of the world if I
Well.
can't get it back in there.
Um,
I mean, that's a pretty old camera.
It's not like I wrenched it out. It just it popped out, but it
this
just should be able
this
to
one
pop back
just
in.
needs the paper clip now,
Let me try.
if you want. But I'm telling you, it can be.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get back in there. Just a minute. Squeeze it.
Whose mouse is that? That's not
No,
mine.
no, the guy found it on the podium and
Somebody forget.
Was this one of our guys?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not comfortable enough to take it.
Yeah, I was reading the article. There's going to be like a price war between like AWS